So I'm going to walk you through what our data set looks like, and I'll do a separate video for each hypothesis. This first video is just going to provide you the background of what exactly we did, because I know for many people they're unsure how do we measure stuff in psychology. Now we have a lot of psych majors, but we also have a lot of majors outside of psychology, and then we do have some psych majors who haven't taken research methods or experimental courses. So some of this probably seems very new to you. What you see on the screen right now is our data set. It is in SPSS, which is the statistical package that we use in the social sciences. But first, let's look and see, how did I get this into the data set? And that is through the Qualtrics survey that you use. So Qualtrics is a great way for us to collect information, and it automatically downloads into different formats such as Excel or SPSS. So if you'll remember what your survey looked like, let's check out our survey. You'll remember that you first had an informed consent. This is very typical if you remember our ethics information that we talked about earlier in Module 1. So this just gave you an idea of what you were doing. It also provided you confidence that this information wouldn't be shared, and in fact, even though you entered your IN number, I have since removed it from the data set, so you can't connect back anybody's information to a particular person. So we have what are called demographic information, such as age, gender, level, if you're graduating, if you have plans after graduation, how many hours you are taking, how many classes you're taking, how many hours you work outside of school, and your relationship status and exercise. After that, you started through the different measures that were related to stress and coping. This first one, the life orientation test, was related to optimism. Next, we had a short one on the coping humor scale. Then we had a longer one on ways of coping. I'm going to show you how this is broken down into 8 different subscales. So all of these different items were grouped based on ones that were similar and indicative of different types of coping. So this one was pretty long. Then we had a measure on personality. Now I actually didn't run any analysis on this. If this is something you'd like to do for extra credit, you can email me because I need to run the syntax on it to break it into the 5 different scales. If you know anything about personality, if you've taken a class related to this, then you know that the Big 5 scale, that's OCEAN, so it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And the reason I put this in is we know that there is some genetic basis for how people cope and how they deal with stress, and personality, we believe, is largely genetically based. There are definitely some environmental influences, but this is a good thing that you could use if you're sort of looking at the core of who people are and how that might impact how they cope and how they deal with stress. Then we had the undergraduate stress questionnaire. Now this is a checklist that includes both major life events as well as daily hassles that the typical undergraduate goes through. Then we had a physical symptom checklist, so we could see what kind of health problems people are having and how much it's bothering them. And then finally we had the perceived stress questionnaire. So a lot of you spoke about in your health profiles correctly that you didn't really realize how stressed you were until you took these measures. And so that is a good indication of how, when you went through the undergraduate stress questionnaire, you might have realized that you had a lot of stressors, but you don't feel that stressed, which is great, and it's something that is quite typical. If we always, all the time, kept at the forefront how much we're going through, that would be really maladaptive and lead to poor mental health. So for many of us, you are used to juggling lots of things, but maybe not perceiving all that you're accomplishing. So this is what our Qualtrics survey looked like, and let's go back to SPSS. So in SPSS, you have a data view and a variable view. So right now you see the data view, and it shows, so for example, this is one person who was 21, who is a male, and it goes all the way across for what their answers were. The variable view, if you click there, it helps you to see what these things meant. So for example, how did I know that 2 meant male? It will have the name of the variable, the type of the variable, a description of it, and then the values over here. Oh, looks like I was wrong. 2 means female. So if you click over on the right little square right here, then that can tell you what these mean. If we look right here, we could see that these are the categories for the different classes. Okay, so that gives you a basic background. Now I want to show you what is called syntax. Now often in class what you learn is how to use the drop-down menus to run analyses. So you click here, click on descriptive statistics, click on frequency, then you have a pop-up window that comes up. You put in the variables you're interested in learning about. So these would be demographic ones. Click on statistics. Then you could click mean, median, and mode, standard deviation, continue, and then typically you press OK, but what I do in my lab and for my research is I press paste. So if you press paste, I'm going to press cancel just because I don't want this in my syntax, but if you press paste, it's going to go into a syntax window. Why syntax is so helpful is it makes it super easy then to replicate any kind of analyses that you're doing. So let me just sort of walk you through the beginning of the syntax, and then once we get down to the hypotheses, I'm going to stop so I can break those up into individual videos. So please use this to fill out the worksheet and to help you to complete your module assignment. I'm going to specifically go through everything so you actually don't have to run the syntax. I'm going to tell you exactly what the output means, so you just need to be able to interpret it based on what is in your textbook and in the articles. But first let's figure out who can we generalize this to. So we have a slightly biased sample. Obviously you're all undergraduates. Also, you all chose to be in health psychology, so you're probably different than if we would have done this survey for all of UNF. So I'm just going to highlight this information and then press this arrow to run it, and we have a output screen that pops up. And what you can see across the top, this invalid, that means the sample size. So we generally had about 60 people complete this survey, but you can see some people may have skipped a certain question, so that's why there's some variation between how many people completed each variable. Then you have your measures of central tendency. If you remember from statistics, the mean, median, and mode, those are your measures of central tendency. If they are about the same, then that gives you a pretty good indication that you have a normal distribution. So on average, we're seeing that people in our class are around 22 years. Now, of course, a mean for a variable like gender doesn't really make sense, but we can look at the mode. So most are female, and we are actually seeing that a lot are graduating this semester. So when we look down here, we can see we have a range of people all the way from 19 to 42. We have almost 80% female. Very few sophomores and mostly seniors. We have 23 graduating this semester. And it looks like a good portion have made plans for after graduation. If you look at how many hours, we have people who are part-time and then people who are full-time. You can see that the mode, most people are taking or 19 of your classmates are taking 12 hours. If we look at how many classes you are taking, the mode is 4. So we see 22 people taking 4 classes. How many hours do you work outside of class? So the mode for this is 0. We had 16 people who are not working outside of class, but you can see this huge range where we have some part-time workers and lots of full-time workers putting in lots of hours. In terms of relationship status, it was pretty much split. Very few people who were married are in the course. And then we see we have a lot of people who are really good at exercising. About 30, about half, say that they're consistent at exercising. And this is a good example of why this is probably a slightly biased sample, because we would expect people who are interested in these types of things to matriculate into a course such as health psychology. So that gives you an idea of what output looks like. Now, just so you're not overwhelmed, I'm going to go ahead and minimize that and then show you how we have to clean the data to get it ready for analysis. So one thing I needed to do is, as you saw with relationship status, there were very few people who were married, and I want to run t-tests. We're just going to do correlations and t-tests because that's something that's very simple that I know regardless of your statistics background you can interpret. So what I did is, you can see with this syntax, it's saying if status is 1, so if your status was single, I'm making a new variable name called distat and saying that you will stay 1. But if your status was in a relationship or married, I'm going to go ahead and collapse you into the variable called distat. And then this just provides a label for it. I'm doing the same thing for sophomores and juniors and seniors, because we're just going to compare sophomores and juniors to seniors in some of our analyses. So we'll go ahead and highlight that and run it. And then what you'll see is if we go back to our data set and scroll all the way down, all the way over, we have 2 new variables. Now you probably are noticing how one thing that's sort of frustrating in working at SPSS is you constantly have to go back and forth between 3 different windows, between your syntax, your data set, and your output. And this is why, if any of you come and visit me in my office, you'll see I have an extended desktop to make this much easier. So now, how do we get all of those items into a summary score? You filled out tons of items, and they all were along a range, along a Likert scale, and we need to sum them up. So I want to walk you through that. For example, on the life orientation test, what's neat about this test is they actually had some filler items. So items 2, 6, 7, and 10 were removed. And this is something you could see in psychology measures, just so that people don't feel like they can guess what they're answering. So this is going to also do some reverse coding. That's another thing that many psychological measures do. You know, sometimes when you're filling out a measure and you know that the answer should always be 5, and you just start circling all the way down the right side and you quit reading the questions. So by doing some questions where for example, an optimistic answer would be a 5, but some questions where an optimistic answer would be a 1, or I'm sorry, a 4 or a 1. By doing this, then this can sort of help us catch if people are just Christmas treeing, if they're just going down and not really reading. So this recodes 4 of the questions, reverse codes them so we can sum them all up, and that will give us a summary score that I'm calling LOT. So we'll run that. Same with the coping humor scale. We had 2 questions that have to be reverse coded, and then it is summed up. Ways of coping. For the ways of coping, as I said, we had 8 different subscales. So we have confrontive coping. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all this and run it at once. Distancing, self-controlling, seeking social support, accepting responsibility, escape avoidance, planful problem solving, positive reappraisal. Now you're going to see a lot of frequencies pop up because this is just going to provide this summary for each of those subscales. So looks like everything ran well because these all came out. And what you also are seeing is we have a nice variation. If you're running analyses, and if I ran this and pretty much everybody was answering the same thing, then it would be highly unlikely that we would see any kind of statistical difference. So a nice variation for all of those. And go ahead and minimize those so it's not overwhelming. Here's our perceived stress questionnaire. We had some items that need to be reverse coded. Then we will sum it up.